So, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. Let's get straight into it. What did I think of this film? So this film was definitely one of the Marvel projects I've been looking forward to the most over the last couple of months. Obviously, we're at a point now with the Marvel films where if you're a fan, kind of every time a movie comes out, it's pretty exciting. But I think in this phase of Marvel films, there's been a couple of films like perhaps The Eternals or Shang-Chi that just kind of, were new stories, didn't have characters that we knew and were potentially less exciting going in. Whereas we've got films like Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness and the upcoming Thor, Love and Thunder, which, have a lot of hype behind them because they are existing properties, characters we already know, characters that we already like for the most part, and, all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, going into this film, it was definitely one that I was excited for, and I can say for the most part, it did not disappoint. This is a really fun film. It kind of keeps on with the visual, dynamic, kind of interesting setup the first Doctor Strange film had. I think it has better characters in this one. I wasn't actually a massive fan of Doctor Strange 1, whereas I really like this film. And this film just has a lot going for it in terms of, as I said, characters that we already really like and an interesting storyline that kind of, potentially kind of moves the universe forward slightly. So across the board, I thought the performances are pretty good in this film. Benedict Cumberbatch, as always, kind of kills it as Doctor Strange, even if the wig and the hair just bothers me and continues to bother me. Elizabeth Olsen as Wanda is incredible. I think she's been one of the best parts of the MCU for a while now. I genuinely think her characterization and her acting and the whole story that she has in these films, including WandaVision, is top tier and, again, one of the best things in the franchise at the moment. Before I go any further, I'm just going to mention that there are going to be spoilers for Doctor Strange in this review. I'm not going to hold back on talking about the plot and kind of where it goes and where that leaves us. So spoiler warning from this point onwards. But yeah, Elizabeth Olsen's Wanda is kind of the bad guy in this film. And that's not actually something that I expected going in. It's not something that was necessarily kind of given away in the trailer. I think the marketing for this film kind of, pushed us down the path of there's going to be an evil Doctor Strange and it's going to be a variant fight and stuff like that. And actually what we get is a Wanda off the back of the events of WandaVision that, still is dealing with the loss of her kids and, all the emotional trauma of WandaVision and losing Vision in Avengers, etc., etc. And what it sets up from the start is actually a really motivated backstory for a villain. If there's one thing that the MCU has constantly struggled with and often lowers the quality of their films, it's the fact that the villains, for the most part, are quite weak. They don't really have great motivations. You don't really tend to side with them or kind of see where they're coming from. And they end up being quite black and white characters that are just kind of, the villain for the villain's sake. On top of that, the villain is often just a carbon copy of the protagonist. And I don't find that very interesting either. You get the kind of Black Panther versus Killmonger where they're even in the same suits and it's like, okay, you're just the same character, fighting another version of yourself. And I think Doctor Strange avoids that thing because one, there is not Doctor Strange. The magic is different, the background's different, the characterization is different. So that's a really strong point in this film. I think the new character of America Chavez is a little weak, if I'm honest. I think she plays it well and kind of does what she gets given, but she doesn't get given a ton to do. She's kind of a character that can jump between multiverses. That's her power, but she can't control it. And it's a very kind of, if I'm honest, well-worn path of can't control their power, need to believe in themselves more to control the power. There's literally a scene at the end which is pretty bad where Doctor Strange goes, basically, you just need to believe in yourself. And then she's like, oh, wow, I can do it now. And it's like, okay, we should be past that in the MCU. There has to be better motivations for these characters. But she was fun. She kind of was a nice play against Doctor Strange and for the most part kind of, gelled well in the film. To talk about direction for a minute, this is a Sam Raimi film through and through. If you thought Spider-Man was campy, this is pretty much in the same vein. Now, it definitely has the restraint of the MCU compared to the Spider-Man films, thank God, because they've not aged well. But it has the makings of Sam Raimi written throughout this whole film, for better or for worse. That might come down to personal opinion. The thing it does for the better is it makes this film really fun and really quite dark, and there's a lot of horror elements, and there's a lot of kind of really on the nose, horror stuff with jump scares and, Wanda walking down a corridor as a zombie and, a lot of the lighting tricks, the music tricks, the cues, that kind of stuff that's pulled straight from The Evil Dead or any kind of horror film. And then on the flip side of that, you've got the for worse, which is probably the fact that it does end up feeling a lot more campy than a lot of the Marvel films. Some of the humor doesn't really hit because I don't think Sam Raimi's film is very funny. Some of the action and kind of beats get a bit over the top. There's a sequence later on in the film where he has a kind of musical fight with a variant of Doctor Strange, and it's one of them where you get what they're going for, but it doesn't really have the effect it's meant to, and I think it felt a bit weak and weird, and to be honest, I didn't really love that. And yeah, just the kind of villains throughout the Wanda and anyone else that's kind of a bad guy or anything in the film just does end up feeling a little one-dimensional, even with the backstories and character growth that goes into it. There's a few moments where I think the film was kind of wrestling with itself there, because you have kind of the overarching stories of the MCU. If you look at Wanda specifically, all the events of WandaVision that lead into this are being presented in the film as her motivation, but then Raimi's film kind of characterizes her as an out-and-out bad guy, and then kind of at times brings in the backstory, and you go, oh yeah, okay, I can see why she's doing this, I understand her backstory. And then just she's a villain again for the next 10 minutes, and then it flips back and you get a scene where she's motivated, and it's like, I found that a little jarring and stuff, but again, I think that's just Sam Raimi's direction. Some of the visuals in this film, as you'd expect, are really, really cool. I actually didn't think there was quite as much as we expected. I know in Doctor Strange 1, we got a lot of the kind of universe bending around itself visual and stuff. I don't think from memory there was as much of that here, but there's still some cool set pieces. There's only one scene in the film where they jump through multiverses, which was a shame, because I think a lot of us thought that was going to be a big part of the film, going into kind of different universes and seeing different styles. There was only one kind of moment, which was kind of in the trailers, where they flip through lots and you get like an animated one and stuff, and it's cool, but it was kind of throwaway. And then we spend a lot of time in a Earth-like universe, and it's one of them where you're like, I get it, it's a multiverse, and the films have to be filmed, so you can sort of see why they do it, but that was a bit of a letdown in my opinion. So in terms of where this leaves the MCU going forward, it actually doesn't change that much still, which is, again, quite surprising. I feel like with this phase of Marvel films and TV, we're kind of constantly expecting them to drive forward and, bring in elements like Kang from Loki and start seeing this kind of overarching plot, but it isn't really getting there yet, and that's fine. They're building more slowly than we expected, potentially, and I think that's probably a good thing in the long run. You don't need to rush these storylines. But yeah, I mean, the film kind of does leave off in a similar position to where it starts. We just don't have Wanda being a bad guy anymore. She's not dead, by the way. No chance. If you don't see a body on screen, someone's not dead. I suppose the America Chavez character, she can now control the multiverse jumping. So yeah, she can kind of do that when she wants, and I'm sure that will come back, and someone will probably use that, against the good guys in the end. But yeah, it didn't drive forward the kind of overarching story as much as I thought it would. The end credit scenes were a letdown for me. The first one is Charlize Theron, just made me think of Fast and Furious. And if you're not a comic person, which I'm not, I don't think you know what that means. And the post-credit scene is literally a throwaway joke. I don't like those post-credit scenes. For me, they wind me up. I've sat there for 5 minutes. Don't just take the piss. But each their own. So yeah, to wrap this up, overall, I think this is a really fun film. I think it's a good film. I enjoyed it. A lot of the characters are really good, really strong, fun visuals, a good time. Pretty scary, actually, for a 12. Quite surprised it got the rating. Sam Raimi's clearly gone for horror. In the confines of the MCU, which is an interesting tone. So yeah, this is a good film, kind of, maybe second tier down in Marvel. It's not one of the best. It doesn't have those emotional beats or kind of really, really, really hype moments, but it's a good film. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. And we'll see you for Obi-Wan Kenobi on Friday.